Hello, fellow DMs. Today I'd like to talk to you about a puzzle idea I had. Well, I guess I'm not sure if I'm really the one who had it originally, but I haven't seen it anywhere else, so I figured, you know what, might as well talk about it. So, for a quick rundown of what it is, you're basically just going to take an intended message for the players, and then select a part of that message, and you're going to try and translate it into something vague, but still somewhat descriptive of what you're trying to get at. So, a quick example is something like, say, river becomes place of flowing life. So there's the quick 30-second approximation of that. And for those of you who just want something to use, there you go, you're free to go. And for the rest of you who want to know a little bit more, continue on. So something I left out of the quick and easy section of this video is talking about how this kind of is going to be given to your players, and the expectation is that they're going to use comprehend languages to understand what's being said, or, what is written on whatever they're reading from. And in my experience and from what I've seen online, when people use comprehend languages, they don't actually tend to use the literal definition of the spell, instead opting for just a quick, easy, you understand what they're saying and I'm just going to speak plainly. So we're going to need some kind of explanation why either whatever you're hearing or reading in this instance isn't being translated in the same way that it normally is. I mean, unless you want to take the time to do this with every conversation in a language the players don't understand, but if I'm going to be honest, that just kind of seems like it'd be a pain. So what I do when I've run this is, instead of having this be something that's written in, say, like Orcish or Druidic or Draconic, it's written in a language that forms separate from the other ones that are currently in your campaign world. It's something too old to be really spoken by anyone. And the reason this is beneficial is because it allows you to explain why it's working this way in this instance and not in more regular instances. And that's because the current languages that players can learn all grew up essentially with each other, and they have more overlap because of this, whereas this other language that you're using is ancient and didn't influence and was not influenced by the other languages that players would know. Now, this will work just fine if this is a spoken or otherwise auditory message that the players are receiving. But this might also be something that they're receiving in written form, and the wording on the spell comprehend languages doesn't technically say that written languages are literally understood, but more just that they're understood. But I don't really think that this is going to be too important of a distinguishment. You can just say that, hey, written languages are literally understood in the same way that a spoken one is. So that's how you can kind of justify it in rules to your players, but what kind of translation issue should you include? Well, I've got 3 main ideas that I'd like to use, but if you have any of your own, feel free to share them in the comments. Now, the first idea that I use is slang and idioms. So, whatever culture originally developed this language is going to have different sayings and idioms from whatever the players might have. A real-world example would be calling something the bee's knees. If you understand history, you'll know that that means that something is cool. But even then, if you kind of look at the word cool and its literal definition, if we said that to someone who didn't understand our culture, they would be kind of thrown off by something being called the bee's knees or cool. Another way you can try and understand this concept is to watch any media that has a fish out of water type character, someone who's been displaced in time or is from a completely different place. Sort of like Captain America from back when the Marvel movies were actually good. Another one I like to use is a different cultural understanding of a concept or a word. So I think an in-world example of this would be how the cultures view a deity. So within whatever world you're using, deities are probably thought of as beings of higher power, whereas in this old society that this language originally came from, a deity may be conceptualized of as a embodiment of a concept or a being with a higher perspective instead, and that would translate into how it, translates. Another example comes from Doctor Who. If you haven't seen the 11th Doctor's run, skip a couple seconds ahead. Now, what I'm referring to is the scene where the Doctor learns who Melody Pond, or River Song, is. And it's in that dual naming where we find what the actual translation issue we can use is. When they're doing the reveal, she describes how the people who wrote down the name on her crib didn't have a concept for a pond because the only source of water in the forest was the river. So her name goes from Melody Pond to River Song. And the last idea, and the one you'll probably end up using the least, is if a concept or word doesn't even have a translation. This can be because maybe they didn't know about something, or, I think more interestingly, because they didn't care about it. So maybe the society didn't even care about God, so they just don't even have a word or concept for it. Or maybe the opposite is true, and they actually have a better understanding of pantheons and deities and have a wider breakdown of what a god is. So it's not just greater, intermediate, or lesser, it also has names for transitions between those. But the understanding of those transition states doesn't exist within the modern world, so they don't have a word for it, and it would just translate as blank. And that's about it for my ideas of what to actually include in the puzzle itself, and the last thing I want to talk about before I go is the actual length of the puzzle and how that will determine what you're going to use it for. If you want to include it as just a quick puzzle in a dungeon, you're probably going to want it to be a little bit shorter. It should only be a couple of lines, and in those lines you should probably only include maybe 2 or 3 things that are actually going to be translational issues for the party to solve. The main way that I've implemented it into my campaigns, though, is as a longer note. I wrote up about 1 page of a lore document that I then just translated and gave to the players that kind of lets them know what's going on with the main villain and what he's trying to accomplish and how he's trying to accomplish it. I found that leaving the players with something to sit and think about in between sessions has also really helped with investment and engagement. That's all I really have to say about that for now. I'll leave some links down in the description to show you how I also formatted this when giving it to my players. If you liked this and ended up using it, leave a comment letting me know. I'd like to see what you guys did with it as well. And that's all I have to say on that, so I hope you all have a great rest of your day.